Hey everybody, it's Chris here, Big Red, welcoming you to another episode of a personal growth podcast. Guys, today we have Suzanne Brown on the line. She's a mom, wife, consultant, speaker, writer, traveler, and author. So the other day I was watching TED Talks, and then this one popped up, Suzanne Brown, and it was essentially just talking about how we can bridge the gap between full-time professional moms and the stay-home moms. There's a huge gray area in between, and that's the sweet spot. She wrote a book on it, and she shares the stories of 110 working professionals. She gives advice, insights on how you can think differently about your career and work-life balance, which doesn't just apply to moms. It's valuable to anybody. So after listening to that TED Talk, I did visit her website, and I realized that she's done this book and this community, but she's done a ton of other stuff too with consulting and entrepreneurship. So she's really an amazing woman. I think we're going to get a lot of value out of this. So I'm really glad you're tuning in. So finally, I simply sent her an email, reached out, asked her to come on the show. She agreed. We set the date, and here we are. And just before we really dive into things, I just want to say a big thank you to you, the listener. You are everything to me. The audience is the most important thing, and my goal is to add value to you. So if there's anything you want to hear or anything I need to do differently, email me, chris@BigRedSays.com. And if you enjoy the content, please leave a review. That means the world to me. I appreciate that so much. And just remember that I absolutely love your attention and support and everything you do for me. All right, with all that being said, I think it's time that we hop on the call with Suzanne Brown.
So I'm Suzanne Brown, and I am a mom to two young boys, and I have a portfolio approach to my career. So on one side, I am a strategic marketing consultant, and then on the other side, I am a work-life balance speaker, consultant, and author.
I kind of explained at the beginning of the episode about a little bit about the mom empowerment. So if you could just tell us a little bit, like, what led up to this whole thing, because it's now a community.
It is. So I worked in mainly in marketing agencies for about 12 years, and then I became an entrepreneur in 2012. And about the last year that I had worked in the corporate world, so I worked for really big companies during pretty much my entire career. But that last year, I ended up, I was a mom, and when I came back from maternity leave, I started working part-time. So I got all of these questions about how did you convince your manager? How did you, can you slowly tell me the words that you said? Oh, wait, can you repeat that one more time? To convince your manager to let you work part-time. And so I just kept getting these questions, and some of the times it was from like strangers, like somebody who was in the same company, and they would just come up and say, hey, I hear you have this situation. Can you talk to me about it? And then once I became an entrepreneur, about a year into being a mom, I still kept getting all the questions. And then it was, okay, well, how can you have your own business, and how can you actually make money, and how do you manage your schedule, and all these kinds of things. And when I started looking around for resources to send people to, because I said, there's got to be a place for professionals to understand how to transition to part-time. There is not a resource for professionals to know how to transition to part-time. So I said, well, I'll just create one. I mean, how hard can that be?
How hard can that be?
Yeah. Which are famous last words, like
Exactly.
for any entrepreneur, right? Yeah. Like, how hard can it be? And so it eventually became a book, and now there's a second book coming out in September. But there is also a community behind it. I have random people write to me who have read the book and said, this completely shifted how I think about my time, and I understand what I want to be able to achieve and how I want to look at work-life balance. So it's been a really unusual experience. Like if you asked me 10 years ago, hey, are you going to write a few books? I would probably have laughed and said, yeah, whatever, I'm going to get back to work.
So it wasn't the original plan. You kind of it's been a journey. It's been like one thing led to another.
So if you asked me what is the best part of this journey, hands down, it is the people who I have met.
Right.
I have met amazing people who, I mean, honestly, who I find inspirational, and who, every interview that I did, because I did talk to 110 professional part-time working moms, every single one of them gave me a little nugget that I could use in my own life. It was like constant learning for basically 3 years as I did these interviews. And so, yeah, it's been an amazing ride.
What was that's an interesting way of, that's an interesting approach. You went out and got the information. What made you decide that, going and just talking to 110? Was that just a random number, by the way, 110?
So the original number was I wanted 100.
You wanted 100, okay.
But as I started talking to people, and as working moms started raising their hands, it's like, oh, I want to talk to her. Oh, wait, I want to talk to her too. Okay, I'll just do one more, right. And I did that a few times. And I think actually the true number is 126 or something like that. But I always just say more than 110, because some just kind of fell out.
Right, okay.
Right, some just, they said, oh yeah, I work part-time, but really it's I don't know, when you have 3 part-time jobs and that equals 60 hours, I don't think that's part-time anymore.
Yeah, true. What I want to, sorry to cut you off there, but the part that I'm a little bit curious about is people were coming to you as you were the expert on it, and then you kind of reversed it and you went out and surveyed people. So I'm curious about what mindset you were in and what you really wanted to accomplish.
So, I didn't want people to pick up this resource, which I didn't know at the beginning was going to be a book, right, and say, well, yeah, if I worked for myself in Austin, Texas, as a marketing consultant, I'd be able to do this too. So I wanted a lot of different perspectives. I wanted lawyers and doctors and engineers, and I wanted some who worked still who were employees, and some who were entrepreneurs, because I didn't want it to be only about working in the corporate world or only about being an entrepreneur, because there are different elements, and right, it's a little different to work for a really big company than it is to work for a smaller company. And I felt like having all of those different voices, I could find trends. So I could see, and with 100, you can start to see some trends. Yeah. So you can start to see average number of years of experience. Is there kind of a natural path of okay, well, you work to this point and then you start doing something different at this point. And so I was able to see that with more people.
Right.
And I always say, I don't have all the answers, right? Even though I am a work-life balance expert of sorts, I still have my work-life balance challenges,
Yeah, of course.
And so being able to point to other people and say, I don't have the answer to that, but when I talk to other people about it, here's what I found.
Smart. And I think the thing I really love about that is that obviously 100 and however many people, there's a lot of different people. So then I assume you didn't just pick one type of person. There's a wide range of people that you surveyed, so that really eliminates excuses from other people, because you could probably name, if this person says, oh, this, I don't know if this will work for me, it's well, I can name you 4 or 5 people that I surveyed that had a very similar situation, and here's how they did it. So I think that's a smart way of going about it.
Exactly. And it's funny because I did actually have something like that happen. I was on a girls' trip with some of my grad school friends, and one of my friends was talking to me about work-life balance. And I said, well, you should read my book. and she said...
That's why you made it.
Yeah, and she said, that would never work in my industry. And she works in the hedge fund industry. And I said, well, that's really interesting because I interviewed a CFO at a hedge fund. And so it was just an interesting exchange to be able to say, actually, I even talked to somebody in your industry about this, this whole concept.
And is that more of a, how does she take that? Is that more of she wants the excuse? Or is that more of a light bulb moment? Oh, really? What's the feedback?
So her response was, well, it must not have been a very big hedge fund.
Oh, okay.
And so the reality is, and it was interesting because I had kind of a similar conversation to the woman who I interviewed, and her comment, the woman who actually shared her story with me said, I could work at a bigger hedge fund, but I would not have the same work-life balance that I do today. And that's really kind of the thing that I was drawn to, because it really is about, if you want to have more of that work-life balance, you can find it even in kind of unusual situations and unusual industries, to be quite honest. Like, you would never think, oh yeah, a CFO of a hedge fund could work part-time. Like, those are probably not things you would associate with each other. But maybe that's the point where you say, okay, maybe I do want to work for a smaller company so I have more flexibility.
And that kind of leads me into my next thing, like, what's the consequences, in your opinion, of poor work-life balance? And then what steps do we take to make a correction there?
So I will tell you, even in my own story, not having work-life balance actually impacted my health. So I had been in New York for several years, and the company that I worked for was opening up an office in Chicago. So I moved to Chicago, and I had terrible work-life balance. It was awful. It was actually pretty amazing how long the hours were that I was working. And I had no time to exercise. I was definitely not focusing on my eating. It was like, what's opened at this hour when I get home at 10 or 11 p.m., let me just shove it in my mouth as quickly as possible and go to bed.
Did you realize it was an issue? Like, were you aware of it?
I just didn't realize how bad it was affecting my body, how bad it was affecting my health, because you're just trying to survive.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I went to the doctor just honestly for my annual exam, and she's like, your body's totally out of whack. And the reality is, stress can have pretty bad, there are major consequences for your health with not dealing with stress, with avoiding work-life balance. And, and it can even be as simple as you don't necessarily even make the right decisions anymore, right? Like you have trouble focusing, you don't necessarily make the right decisions. You're just not performing at your best. So everything gets impacted, right? Like your relationships, you might snap at your significant other, you might not be the kind of friend that you want to be, your work product can definitely take a little dip, or honestly even a big dip. Like it all depends on how bad it gets. And I think that we in general always think, well, it's not going to get that bad. Yeah. It's for me, it's not going to get that bad, but it can.
100%. And I think for a lot of people it is. And I just wonder, like, because I've been there myself, and in the moment I don't even realize it, and I don't know what is that, like, what's that thing. So, like, what steps does someone take to start, if they have realized it, what steps do they take to correct it?
So I think this is where boundaries are actually incredibly important, and starting to put them in place even when you aren't necessarily all in about thinking about boundaries. And I think boundaries kind of take a few different, you need them in a few different kinds of scenarios. So part of it is literally like the boundary between work and life, right? Like it's that being able to step away from all things work related when you get home, which is actually really hard because we're so connected. Yeah. And so that really kind of requires discipline, right? Of like, I'm going to stop looking at my phone at this time, and I'm not going to look at email again. But I also think it's a matter of not starting your day looking at your phone. Yeah. Because
and that's like a whole thing we can talk about.
Yeah. But I think part of it also is boundaries can kind of help you set up your day so that you can get your work done. Because if you literally are just in back-to-back meetings all day long and you don't have time to work, you have to take work home. Yeah. And so being able to say, you know what, I'm only going to be in meetings from this point to this point, and actually setting up the time on your calendar to work. Or being able to say, I need to start out my day. The first hour of my day is a power hour. And that is actually how I start my day. And so I try not to have meetings that first hour of the day. Right. And I don't check email. I don't answer my phone. It is like, sit down, and not only am I getting stuff done, but I'm getting the most important, the most challenging, the most strategic work done. Yeah. Because that's when I'm at at my best. Like for me personally, that first part of the day is when I am at my like sharpest.
Yeah. And it sounds like you're very intentional, and that's where I think a lot of people aren't. Like I do, like in the work I do, I see sales trends, and when the weather gets really hot and all of a sudden all the fans are sold, and it's like they're reacting that day to the thing. I mean, it's not like that's a bad thing, but it's just like I feel like a lot of the way we do things is just habit. We're very reactive, so kind of taking that out and planning it is super important. But one question I do have, in your situation, did you have like people from your work when you were like more on the corporate life that you hung out with outside of work? Because I know that's a struggle for a lot of people, is that their work people are also their out of work people, and this I think will make that balance a little bit more difficult.
So I personally decided that I wanted more of a line.
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
I wanted to because I basically had a side hustle for 7 or 8 years before I became 100% entrepreneur. And so I needed to make sure that the lines were a little more clearly drawn.
Right.
And so, for example, on Facebook, I removed everybody who I worked with. And either we were personal friends, or if we were professional friends, so to speak,
right.
You were a LinkedIn contact. And I was very specific with who I hung out with and, you know, who I went for coffee with or who I was spending time with at lunchtime. Like it was a very specific, it was very intentional, like you said. And that for me was really important because I just needed more boundaries, right?
Yeah. Is this in your book as well, or is this a little bit separate?
I mean, I definitely talk about boundaries in the book, but this element of kind of making sure the professional side stayed professional and the personal side stayed personal, that's kind of my own thing. And it works differently for everybody. You know, like my husband, his closest friends are the people who he works with.
Yeah. I mean, it's
and that completely works for him. And they don't necessarily infringe on his family time.
Right.
That wasn't necessarily the situation that I was in.
Yeah.
You know, there was a little bit more of a blurry edges.
So you gotta make the boundaries, like you said, the boundaries, and even with people that they're friends at work or they're friends outside of work, you can make that boundary. Like, hey, we're not at work, man. Like, I don't want to hear you talk about work.
Exactly. I think that's actually a great way to think about it because those work friends are actually incredibly important. I mean, they're part of your network, right? So you don't want it to be like, I only talk to you in the office and then we don't talk anymore. Like you still want that to be there, but I think that's actually a great piece of advice of we're not going to talk about work.
Yeah.
Like, or, okay, 10 minutes to talk about anything work related and then we're done.
Get it out. This kind of leads into the next thing. So the way I actually discovered you was through the TED Talk, which was really good, by the way. Good job on that. Like that. I always kind of picture myself standing up there. I'm like, man, could not do it. I'm sure I could, but it seems very nerve-wracking. But tell us about the TED Talk. Like, what led up to that? How did that happen? And how was that experience for you?
So the TED Talk was probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my career.
Yeah.
And, I mean, keep in mind that at that point, I had presented or been in front of an audience on a regular basis for my roles, and sometimes in front of incredibly senior people at huge companies, right? So it's not like I didn't have a ton of that experience. Still, like you said, nerve-wracking. I mean, it was the hardest thing because you don't have, there's no crutch, right? Like, you don't have slides that help trigger something else. You don't have, it's not like you've got your speech out on a podium. It's you and the audience, and you're just Mike. There's no boundary, nothing. But that said, one of the coolest things I've ever done. And so I reached out to a friend of mine who had been the previous executive director of the TED Talk at SMU. And I said, hey, I'm just looking for some pointers on what makes a good speech and what makes, and what doesn't. Like, what do you want to see when you get a proposal? Yeah. And so she's like, you know, talk to me about this. And then she said, can you just write that up for me? And so I did a very we'll call it light, very loose overview of what we had talked about. And the next thing I know, I get an email from the executive director of the TEDx SMU, and she's like, hey, so I would like to talk to you so that we can have you come and do a TED Talk in October.
Oh, that moment was like, oh my God.
Yeah, all of a sudden it became real, right? And I decided to treat the TED Talk a little bit differently than other people might. And so for me, I created it as why is this an important topic? And then my book was more of, okay, so now that you think it's important, here are ideas on how to be successful in making this happen in your own life. And so the talk was really to create this holistic approach to my topic, right? It was to set it up in a specific way. But it takes a ton of practice. And I think in general, like for those people who want to do a TED Talk, it's being able to, it's a different style to do a talk than it is to do like a normal presentation, right? Because there's a huge story element to it. And so you have to know, like, how does your story line up with whatever it is that you're trying to share? How do you bring in stories throughout? Because that's really what people respond to. And how do you, because it's a professional thing, but it's educational and it's storytelling. So there's kind of a lot of different pieces. So you can't just like write a speech. Like that's not how you approach it. But you also have to know it so well that if something happens, like my talk was originally 17 minutes and they came to us in the morning and said, everyone's talk has to be 13 minutes or less.
Oh. Thanks.
And so I had to know my talk so well to be able to say, okay, what do I want to be able to take out? Like if there's one whole section of this that I can remove, what is that section going to be? And so you really have to know your material and be able to kind of think on the fly, and not actually have it impact your talk.
Yeah. It's like you're doing a presentation. Like it's a presentation. Like even I noticed myself, there's even watching you take steps, like I was very noticeable of you, like even taking a step, which is a weird thing, but TED Talks are very unfiltered. Yeah.
Well, and you want whatever it is that you're saying to be amplified by what you're doing, right? So, you want your gestures to continue to amplify the message. Right. And you have to be very aware. You can't like flap your arms around. Like if you, I talk with my hands. Like you all can't see us right now, but if you could, you would see that I talk like putting my hands down. Like I don't actually know if I could do a presentation with my hands down. But you have to be so much more aware of that. And even as basic a thing as like what you wear. Yeah. They were very honest and they said, you can't wear all black because then you just look like a floating head. But I think that it really is about either finding a unique voice or finding a topic that hasn't been discussed over and over. Because those are the things that really attract the people who were looking for the TED Talk ideas to gravitate towards your idea.
So, and with those, is that something that you have to submit to do, or does the TED community reach out to people to talk?
I think they do both.
Both, okay.
Normally, if you are submitting, it's generally a process where you have to go and actually, so you submit some kind of proposal, and then for a lot of the talks, for a lot of the TED Talk locations, you actually have to go and speak in person. Oh. And basically, it's almost like a competitive element, right? Because they also need to make sure that when you get up there and you talk, that you have the right kind of talk, that you're the right kind of presenter, So there is that additional challenge in what it is that you're talking about and what it is that you're presenting, because you've got to sell yourself.
No, 100%. 100%.
Yeah.
So, was that a growth moment for you?
Oh, yeah. No question about it. And it really made me think about how I had to be strategic because I was very honest and I said, I haven't written my book yet. And she's like, nope, that's fine. So I had to think about, okay, they don't have to be the same. Like, yeah. I can literally do one topic here and one topic here if that's what I wanted to do. But that's why I set it up that way, because you really need to think about what will your TED Talk add to your business, career, however it is that you want to have it mesh with what you're trying to accomplish short term and long term. And that made me think about things very differently of how am I going to set things up.
Gotcha. So do you find people still responding to that, like coming out of the woodworks, like, hey, I saw your TED Talk?
I have been approached so many times because of that talk. And it's been very interesting because I am a researcher. I mean, it's part of what I do for my own clients. And so to have people refer back to that is actually, I love that. Like, it's something that I did put a lot of work into, but it's like, oh, I'm a research point now. Yeah,
that's true, which is really cool. Maybe someday I'll get to that level too, and then we'll reminisce.
I like it.
So kind of leading into something different, you mentioned like your side hustle, which I really respect, and a lot of people listening will respect that too. They're kind of doing the thing on the side. So tell us what your side hustle was kind of in the early years, and then what you're kind of doing now with like the business and the marketing and consulting.
So the business and the marketing consulting was my side hustle.
Okay, so they're one of the same.
Yeah. So basically, when I finished grad school, pretty much walking out of grad school, I had a client say, "Hey, can you work on this project for me?" And I said, "Well, sure, but I'm actually trying to work for a company." And he's like, "Yeah, whatever, that's fine. Can you just work on this project for me?" And so I literally walked out of grad school with clients, right? And part of the reason why I maintained the side hustle was because my focus, and most people don't go back and get an MBA so they can have work-life balance. That's not normally the reason why you go and get an MBA. But I had such a kind of hectic, crazy, good ride in marketing agencies, but it was just really intense. And I said, I need to make a shift. And so I said, you know what, getting an MBA is going to help me do that. But walking out, I had a pretty good idea of what I was worth, what I should be paid, what I should be making. And the company that I walked out of grad school and worked for was definitely known for their work-life balance, but they weren't paying me enough money. And so I said, okay, so you're going to give me the work-life balance that I want, but manager of mine, you're going to have to agree that I get to do the consulting and you need to be flexible. So if I need to leave for a 3-hour lunch, you need to be okay with me leaving for a 3-hour lunch. If I need to work from another location for a few days, you need to be okay with that because you're not paying me what I'm worth. So I'm going to go make up the difference.
And did that flew? That was good?
Yeah. I mean, you have to know what you can negotiate, right? Like I filled all of the boxes he was looking for. I just needed extra flexibility. So he's like, okay, that seems fair. And I didn't abuse it. It's not like, Monday through Friday I was having 3-hour lunches. And I mean, I worked incredibly hard. I managed a team of 6 people. And I made sure everyone was taken care of. The times that I did need to go somewhere, I was still reachable if I needed to be. So, but I'm like, I'm not going to make enough money working for this company, but I'm interested in working for this company because of what they offer.
Gotcha.
And, and I left every day by like 6:30. So I definitely had the work-life balance. It just wasn't the right cultural fit. And so I had sworn up and down that I would never work for a marketing agency again. And then I went and spent 6.5 years at a marketing agency in Austin. And I had the same conversation. I said, you all aren't going to pay me what I'm worth. So I need to be able to have the flexibility to do this. I negotiated that with my manager along with extra vacation time. And they were fine with that. The only rule that they set in place was you can't consult for any competing brands.
Which is fair.
Totally reasonable. But that was the thing of I knew my value. I knew what I brought to the table. I happened to be, when I went to work for that marketing agency, I was working for someone who I'd worked for in New York. So she knew my work ethic, my work product. She's like, I want you on my team. And so maybe I had a little bit more negotiation opportunity because of that. But she also knew for the time that I was in the office, I was going to work my tail end off. And I mean, maybe a bad week at that agency was like 45 hours, like maybe. Yeah. But I was really efficient during the day, and I hustled and I got all my stuff done. And, and she was very respectful of when I have a client meeting, she knew that, and she was not going to interrupt that meeting, unless it was an absolute emergency. And that way I continued to build my own brand at the same time that I was helping the company that I was working for. It was, I got to do both at the same time.
Which is amazing. And it sounds like, again, like this was your doing, like this was very intentionally done by you, this setup, because, I say like, oh, I wish I could do that, but like I've never tried. I haven't set my life up in that way to do that. So for you, it was intentional. I think that's a very valuable lesson that we can get out of that. The next kind of thing I kind of want to wonder about, like the business now, like as we sit here now, like how is that going?
It's going well. And I work on a few different things, and I didn't know that I was going to do that when I started my own business. But when I became 100% entrepreneur, I thought, okay, I'm going to be an integrated marketing communications person, and here's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to help companies with their marketing plans, and this is how I'm going to set it up. And one, that's not necessarily what I focused a huge part of my energy on initially, because I kept getting all of these questions on how do you work with your marketing agency? And I thought, okay, we graduated from the same MBA program. It's like a top 20 program. Why am I getting these questions? And as I probed more and more, because I was getting these questions constantly as an entrepreneur, they came back and said, when did we get training as MBAs on how to manage a marketing agency? And I never looked for those courses in an MBA program because I already had that experience. And so I actually created a training based on that I did in person for years. And I'm in the process of switching it over to, I shouldn't say switching it over, but adding a video component to that. So it'll be a video series now. But then Austin is a market with a lot of consultants. There are a lot of people here who do marketing consulting. And so I actually had to kind of niche down in what it is that I do. So I don't really do marketing plans anymore. I deal more with higher level marketing challenges with seasoned entrepreneurs. So it's things like I write business plans for entrepreneurs who have this is like their fifth business and they want to go after money, but they don't want to have to write another business plan. And they have all of the research and they're like, can you just write this document? Or entrepreneurs will come to me and say, okay, I have this business idea. Here's where I think I want to go. Is it even worth it?
Yeah.
Is there even a market there? And so I tend to do a lot more things that are a little bit of research, a little bit of business, and a little bit of marketing. And I don't really do any execution of things because I can point them in the direction of a lot of other people to do the execution of things like marketing plans. And for that matter, I can point them in the direction of other people who do marketing plans, but those people don't do things like writing business plans and doing market opportunity research. That's not a niche for a lot of the people who were initially my competitors. So, you've got to niche down in order to kind of own your expertise. And that's when I felt a lot more confident in what I had versus my competitors.
Because you became like the expert at that thing.
Yeah, it's like that's part of what I'm known for. I mean, even the CEO of the last large company that I worked for, even he sends me clients of like, oh yeah, you need to go talk to Suzanne. And so that's what you want, right? It's to be able to really own the expertise that you have instead of, oh, okay, I'm one of 20 people who does that. So hopefully they'll notice me and think I'm different enough to go with my stuff versus the other 19. Like,
it sounds like there's some self-awareness there that's important too. Just knowing what you're good at and kind of amplifying it, I guess.
yeah, and also letting the other stuff go, right? It's being able to say, you know, I'm not as good in these other areas, or I don't really want to put a lot of effort here, or there are other people who rock at this, and I don't need to rock at that because I've got this over here. You know, it's like comparative advantage, right? It's like economics.
And a concept, it's not quite the same thing, but something I always kind of like is like that think win-win. So if it's like someone doesn't always have to lose. So if we're in the same industry, they're really good at this thing, and I'm really good. Maybe we can complement each other rather than like compete against each other, which is kind of a cool thought.
Yeah, and honestly, like, there have been projects that people have come to me and said, I want you to have this role in this project that I'm working on. And it's like, you know what? That's not really what I want to do. And sure, I can do that, but I'm going to introduce you to John over here. You know, and John is actually perfect for what it is that you're looking for. And honestly, there will be times when John will do the same for me. And so, you know, it's being able to form those relationships with people, but it's also understanding what they do really well, because you want that reciprocity, right? Like, you want to be able to point people in the right direction, and you want them to realize what you do as well, right? So forming those collaborations and just general like referrals and things like that, like, I think that's been incredibly helpful too.
Yeah, it sounds just like that's good business. That's like amazing right there. I love that. So kind of getting to the later stages of this, like, in your opinion, what are the most important traits for entrepreneurship?
So I think part of it is being able to problem solve. I think that's actually one of the most important traits. Yeah. And I don't know if that necessarily gets as much airtime, but as an entrepreneur, you are constantly solving problems for your clients, right? And sometimes it's the problem that you think you're solving for, and other times it's not. So you have to be able to probe and get a little bit more information. And I think part of that, or what makes you really good at problem solving, is curiosity. You know, you want to be able to ask questions, and you want to be able to get an answer and then say, oh, well, that's interesting. Can you give me a little bit more information? Can you, like, tell me more, you know? And I think that if you are genuinely curious, then you're able to uncover those things a lot faster than if you kind of leave curiosity out of the mix. And then I think the final one is you have to be okay with switching gears, right? Like, you think that you're going down a path, and there's a big old mountain in your in your path, and you're going to either have to go over it or around it or under it. You know, you've got to be able to kind of switch gears and realize, okay, this is not the best option. So how can I shift things a little bit, or how can I pivot, or, you know, whatever it is that you need to do, but to kind of change direction and not think you have to go one way because that was what you set out to do.
Did you have a mentor?
I have had lots of mentors.
Right.
And I will also say, not only have I had mentors, but I have had sponsors. And, you know, a mentor is somebody who can really you can bounce ideas off of them. They can be a great sounding board. But a sponsor is somebody who opens the doors. And I think as entrepreneurs, we don't necessarily think about the importance of sponsors, but they are equally as important to an entrepreneur as they are to somebody who's still an employee. And those sponsors basically can hand you over to somebody with their seal of approval, right? It's like that CEO who introduces somebody to me. He has basically given his seal of approval, right? He is acting as a sponsor, not really as a referral.
Yeah.
You know, and so I think it's, as an entrepreneur, being able to find those people who will mentor you, but also who will open doors, who will talk to clients about your strengths and say, this is your guy. You want to talk to Chris. This is your guy right here. And I think that is something that we don't do enough as entrepreneurs. Like, hands down, we don't do it enough.
Yeah.
And that really moves the needle.
Yeah, I think that's something that isn't done enough just in general. It's like, even the concept that I, like, something I'm really big on right now is just like your circle of influence, and how, you know, the people I think that have like that growth mindset are very aware of it, but I think the rest of the community maybe not be super aware of how important your circle is. But what I want to get from you is this. So if I'm listening, I'm thinking, damn, like, Suzanne's amazing. Like, I want to follow her. I want to be with her on this journey. Like, where do you live online? Like, where are you at?
So I love Twitter.
Yep.
Not everybody loves Twitter, but I love Twitter. That's actually where we met, or that's where we started to communicate
Yep.
together. And so I am at Mompowerment on Twitter, and I tend to share things about work-life balance there. And then I am at OK Susie Marketing for everything related to marketing. And that's where I share more about things related to all kinds of different aspects of marketing. And I share a little bit about career and business building on both. Just the OK Susie Marketing tends to be more marketing-esque.
Gotcha. And I could throw that stuff in the show notes. I'll hit you up after to make sure I get that. And the cool thing with Twitter is that it's very good if you want to reach out. It's like, it's a nice way to actually like message people, which I really love about Twitter that way. So I guess kind of at the end of this now, like, is there anything that you just need to get off your chest, or one final piece of advice you'd give the listeners?
So I want to
keep it in mind. Keep it in mind, just because my audience, just so you know, is between 21 and 34 is the average thing.
So this is perfect for that audience. So a lot of times people really focus on saying no, right? You want to protect your time. You want to make sure that you are, that you have those boundaries. But my suggestion to this audience is to say yes. It's to look out and to intentionally say yes, but to look at the opportunities that are out there and say, why not? You know, because this is that perfect moment of your life where you can work your tail end off. You can work on really interesting, unusual projects, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you work for a small company or a big company, whether it's, you know, whether you're still in school and a professor comes to you and says, hey, can you be my research assistant on this project? I mean, it can take a lot of different forms, but it's being able to say yes and really embrace those opportunities that come your way. And so that's why you say no, right? So you can say yes to these other things, but say yes. You know, don't be afraid. Like, face them head on and say, heck yeah, and like make it happen.
And I think that's a place where you're going to find all your growth.
You know, I had never thought about it that way, but yeah, you know, I think the times when I said yes were really when I did grow. You know, my skill set grew, my network grew. There were just these opportunities where all of a sudden there was just this new thing that came of it. And I still try to do that, right? It becomes harder as you have a family, as you move further along in your career. You know, you have to be very careful with what you say yes to. But I think initially it was, you know, we didn't really talk about that, but I moved through the ranks very quickly in the corporate world because I said yes, right? Because there were these opportunities that came up and I was like, sure, you want me to work on that? I think that would be an amazing project. This is what I will be able to do with that. So yeah, I'm totally on board. And it's amazing the doors that open when you say yes, but you strategically say yes, right? So you think about, like, where can that lead, even though it's not necessarily on the path that you thought you were going to be on.
Right. So it's not necessarily saying yes to everything and maybe be taken advantage of. It's like you're actually being intentional again. So what I'm getting from you is that you've intentionally lived your life. Like, you have had your success because you, like, made it that way.
I am very strategic with how I set things up, and I am incredibly intentional with my time, my effort, my energy, like all of those things, because, you know, there are a lot of different things that I want to be able to achieve, and if I'm not intentional, then I'm kind of all over the place, right? Then you're just like, see what sticks on the wall. And I think that you create your opportunities over time, right? Like I'm a big believer in you help yourself to the next thing, right? Like, yes, there is an element of luck, but it's because of what you have done in order to have that luck moving forward. The
compound effect.
Yeah, totally. Compound effect is a great way to think about it. But I think that it's being able to see, if I do this, I am going to have access to a senior leader who I would never have access to without doing this project. Right. So it's a little out of like truly what I know how to do, but why not? Yeah. If it doesn't go amazingly, then I can treat it as a learning opportunity. But if it does go really well, like talk about like gold stars behind my name, like, yeah, and some of those things were totally out of my realm of expertise. I mean, like, I remember being in my first job in New York. The head of HR sent out an email, and she's like, "Hey, we have some college students coming who are, and we need somebody to talk about this particular department. Who wants to do it?" And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, this is the head of HR. I mean, these are college students. I'm literally like a year out of college. So all I have to do is get up and talk about what I do every day. Yeah, like, why not? I mean, how hard can that be? And then I ended up working on another project for her. And then a few companies later, so this is a few years later, she hired me to be an MBA recruiter. Wow. At the company that she moved to. And, that opened up other doors because other senior leaders had moved there from that company that we had both been at. And so I got to do some really other cool stuff. I mean, that was part of the reason I ended up moving to Miami for a little bit, and then I moved to Chicago. And so, so it just has this compound effect, like you said, about like just other things become available to you, and people say she can make stuff happen. Yeah. And that's the kind of person that you want to be when you're in that 20s, early 30s range. Like, you want to be the person that people come to and say, I've got to have you on my team. Yeah. Like, okay, what do I need to do to talk to your manager so I get you on your next rotation? Like, that's where you want to be.
And that's, like, I could not have asked for better advice for young people, because that really resonates with me, and I have some people in my mind right now thinking of that I'm going to like play this back for very intentionally, because I've learned that from you. And for people that don't know, I compared Suzanne to an onion earlier, which I'll talk about later on. But to get into that's just completely off topic. But anyway, I read a little birdie told me that you love to travel. So what's your favorite destination? Just to kind of wrap things up on a fun note.
So I'm going to have to think about that for a second. Okay. So my favorite place that I have lived is Mexico. Okay. Because it is such a good standard of living when you're a professional. I'll be very honest. They take 2-hour lunches. It's very focused on family. Like work-life balance totally happens in Mexico. And I would go away like every other weekend while I was living there. Like, it's just such a good lifestyle. My favorite country to have visited by myself is probably Italy. Okay. It's beautiful. The people are so much fun and so warm and so just so open about interacting with foreigners and just having a good time with it. And then my favorite place to have traveled with kids yeah. is Ireland.
Okay, really?
And we took a trip to Ireland. It was our first transatlantic trip with 2 very young boys at the time. Like, we had like a toddler and like a 4-year-old. And it was amazing to travel with these 2 young boys in Ireland. The people are so friendly, so kid-friendly, so honestly just so welcoming. Like, you can tell I'm not a wallflower by any stretch of the imagination. And people they would like talk to each other, like total strangers would talk to each other on the train, like on the way to where we were, because we went to the West Coast. And and like just, a person sits down next to you and just immediately strikes up the conversation and talks about your kids. And it's one of the few places that we have gone that we've said, we have to come back. Like, we've got to come back, not like in 20 years, but like we'll come back in a few years and then we'll go see another part of the country. But yeah, it was, those are my three that I'll lay out there.
All right. On that note, I really, really appreciate your time. I think there's a ton of like real life, practical, intentional information here that we can take away from it. So I really appreciate you taking your time, and I will definitely hit you up on Twitter, and I'll put all your stuff in the show notes so people can find it there. And again, thank you so much.
Chris, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our chat, and I can't wait to see what people start asking you about and what people start thinking about and sharing.
All right, guys, I really, really hope you enjoyed that episode. Suzanne is living proof of what's possible when we challenge our fears, act strategically, and act out of intention. I think if we take that feedback into our own lives, we can make a lot of good change. Remember, I really appreciate you listening. Thank you so much. Please leave a review on iTunes if you can, and have a super, super good day.